Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really hot topic. We're unpacking the specific claims and theories that political commentators are raising about voting systems out in Los Angeles and the rest of California. If you've been following the news lately, you know there is a ton of chatter out there. So we're here to objectively break down exactly what these sources are saying and, crucially, why it's causing such a massive uproar.
Now you might be wondering, why are some commentators claiming the system is totally broken? Listen, to folks watching from across the ocean, or honestly, even just across state lines, California's electoral process can sometimes look pretty incomprehensible. But California is often a political and cultural bellwether for the whole country, right? The policies tested there usually ripple outward. So we're going to structure the actual arguments driving this skepticism, going straight to the sources to see what's really fueling this debate.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at questioning California's elections. Then, we'll hit claims of voter irregularities, followed by the broken system theory. After that, we'll look at the impact on trust, and finally, wrap up with proposed election reforms. We're moving straight from the specific allegations all the way to the proposed solutions.
All right, Section 1, questioning California's elections, getting the view from the pundits. You know, what's fascinating here is that even self-described moderate, middle-of-the-road commentators are starting to express this shared feeling that something is just systematically wrong with the state's voting process. The crucial point to understand here is the massive divide in perspective. On one hand, you've got establishment figures like Hakeem Jeffries completely dismissing these concerns. They're stating there isn't a shred of evidence of wrongdoing. Actually, the commentators we're looking at describe that phrase as almost like a magic spell, something designed to instantly shut down any critical debate. But on the other side, these moderate pundits are looking at the exact same landscape and concluding, well, something's rotten here. They argue the issue isn't like some shadowy, illegal hacking scheme. No, their concern is that the system itself is legally structured in a way that allows highly questionable activities, like incredibly long counting periods and ballot harvesting, to happen right out in the open, totally protected by the law.
Moving on to Section 2, claims of voter irregularities and the specific allegations. To truly grasp where this skepticism is coming from, we have to look at the highly localized, very specific anecdotes these commentators are using to anchor their claims.
Now the commentators do acknowledge that there might not be one single massive smoking gun, but they point to what they see as a mountain of localized evidence that indicates a broken process. First off, they bring up circulating videos where homeless individuals allegedly admit to being paid $2 to hand over or sign off on votes for candidates like Karen Bass or Nithya Raman. $2. Then they reference an investigation by commentator Benny Johnson. He went to a specific LA address where 24 registered Democrats were officially listed. But when he got there, he didn't find an apartment complex. No, he found an abandoned baseball field with literally just 2 porta potties. Finally, they argue that mass mail-in balloting inherently comes with what they call baked-in fraud. Their logic? Mailing millions of unrequested ballots naturally creates massive gaps in the chain of custody, which they say leaves the system incredibly vulnerable.
Which brings us to Section 3, the broken system theory, or really understanding the mess. Let's shift gears to the philosophical core of their argument. Why do they think these bizarre, isolated incidents actually matter on a macro scale?
Well, author Walter Kern offers a really fascinating perspective on this. He suggests, and I quote, "The best way to create fraud is that you just create so much of a mess around everything that no one knows how to make sense of any of it at all." The commentators are using this exact theory to neutrally explain their view that systemic confusion and these deeply delayed vote counts aren't just innocent little bureaucratic oopsies. In their eyes, creating a confusing, messy, drawn-out process acts as a sort of information vacuum where distrust just thrives. They view it as a deliberate tactic that degrades public trust over time until absolutely no one believes the system is functioning properly.
And this brilliantly illustrates that exact theory in action. Think about a traditional election night. You generally have a set expectation, right? Either there's no clear result and we wait, or the trailing candidate concedes and the race is totally over. But commentators point to the reality of the recent Nithya Raman race to show how the current system completely defies logic. On election night, Raman was in 3rd place and completely conceded the race. It was supposedly a done deal. But days later, as this incredibly slow trickle of mail-in ballots was counted, the 2nd-place candidate dropped to 3rd, and the candidate who had literally already given a concession speech was suddenly declared the winner. For the pundits, this wild, unpredictable swing days after the election is the primary fuel for their theory. It completely shatters the psychological finality of election day.
Let's head into Section 4, the impact on trust. We're looking at apathy and the political divide here. We really need to unpack the psychological and political toll these alleged systemic issues are taking on both the candidates and the actual voters.
So the commentators argue that this drawn-out, confusing process creates a massive chilling effect on political participation. The core thesis they're pushing here is simple. Sensible people remove themselves from unsensible systems. They point to outsider candidates like reality TV star Spencer Pratt, who actually drummed up some serious, genuine online energy and support, but ultimately couldn't break through what these critics view as a flawed, entrenched bureaucratic wall. Because people no longer believe the system genuinely works based on the will of the voters, the fear is that future sensible, moderate challengers will just look at the landscape, realize they can't win against the machine, and outright refuse to even run. That obviously leaves voters with fewer genuine choices and just solidifies establishment control.
So what happens when voters just stop believing the system works at all? It's a critical rhetorical question. And frankly, why should you care if you live 1,000 miles away from Los Angeles? Well, the commentators warn that this growing apathy is going to further the political divide across the entire country. If the electorate starts viewing a messy election process as just another unchangeable fact of life, kind of like how some folks view California's ongoing homelessness crisis, then civic engagement just flatlines. The system chugs along without true public buy-in. It becomes this blueprint for democratic apathy nationwide, where citizens just accept a broken process the same way they accept bad weather.
Okay, finally, Section 5, Proposed Election Reforms. We've looked at the problem from their perspective. Now let's outline the actionable legislative fixes the commentators are proposing to actually restore faith in the system.
Let's move to the solutions and see how this builds. How do these commentators actually propose we fix this whole shebang? They systematically outline 3 major reform steps they believe would dramatically clean up the process. Step 1. Implement the SAVE Act and legally require voter ID to cast a ballot, just ensuring the person voting is who they say they are. Step 2. Stop universal mass mail-in voting entirely. They want to restrict mail-in ballots strictly to older or infirmed voters who physically need them. And Step 3, if mail-in ballots are used, require them to be postmarked 4 days prior to the election. The rationale here is absolutely crucial. It ensures all votes are physically present at the counting facility so that all counting happens and concludes exactly on Election Day. They strongly believe that establishing these strict, predictable boundaries would instantly make people feel good about the democratic process again.
And look, the commentators aren't just dwelling on the past here. They're already applying this exact same skepticism to the immediate future. Looking ahead to the upcoming California gubernatorial race involving candidate Steve Hilton, they are sounding a massive alarm. They're warning that this race is going to be the ultimate stress test. If we get to November and a major candidate like Hilton is leading on Tuesday night, only to slowly lose that lead by the following Monday because of a delayed trickle of mail-in ballots, well, they say it will result in an absolute, total loss of public buy-in. The fragile trust that still exists simply will not survive another high-profile delayed reversal.
Ultimately, we're left with this massive gap between the current reality of California's voting system and the demands of its vocal critics. On one side, you have establishment figures maintaining there is absolutely zero evidence of widespread fraud and that the system is working exactly as intended. On the flip side, commentators are pointing to systemic messiness, localized anomalies, and these agonizingly delayed vote counts as proof of a fundamentally broken process that just drains public trust. So, I'll leave you with this to chew on. Will these proposed legislative reforms ever be enacted to restore confidence, or is this deep-seated election skepticism simply our new reality?